Hello, everyone. Today we are joined with two very experienced doctors. At the bottom, we have Dr. Hashmi. He's a psychiatrist consultant and he's had many years of experience in the field. And we have Dr. Mirza as well, who is a GP and he has had lots and lots of experience as well. And today we're going to be discussing the topic of how to cope with emotional rejection. Um, so I think to get started, I think what is emotional rejection? And we'll let Dr. Hashmi to explain that briefly.
Thank you very much, Diane, and I'm very grateful, Dr. Mirza, for inviting me again to talk about it. I think what happens is rejection is a part of life. Whenever we feel disappointment or failure in achieving any of our ambition, which we set to achieve in our lives, we feel rejected. Simple examples is very much like applying for a job and not being shortlisted for an interview, which is more practical or a physical aspect of it. It becomes more complicated when it comes to our emotions and our mind. Now, ordinarily, under normal circumstances, we all are programmed, rather inbuilt, to cope with rejection, disappointments. But some of us actually take it more personally and finds it very hard to deal with rejection, especially if it is an emotional one. If the rejection, if a disappointment is on the practical side of life, like as I give an example of a job interview, or an example of you expected to travel on a certain time with a certain flight, you miss it, you feel rejected, one thing after the other, or friendships, you make and break of friendships, you feel rejected sometimes you are not listened to properly, you feel rejected. But these things, people generally cope with it because they are more practical terms. But when the emotions are involved, when you fall in love with somebody, or when you start psychologically accepting someone and you are rejected, that is when it is very hard to cope.
And do you think the falling in love is, is in your mind? Because the love keep on changing. What I see in the society now, like the people say, "Oh, I don't love you anymore," and then she or he leaves, and the person who left behind, because is left, and then he feels rejected. So my question will be: so is it the love which is causing the problem, or is it just the one who is left behind hasn't find the right person, so he feel rejected?
No, what happens is more complicated to it. We all change in life. Our priority changes. Now, if you look at human personality, which is divided into certain boxes, it doesn't work the way it is presented in academics level or in books. We all pick and choose certain aspects of our personality and the way we deal with things. And the term I'm intending to use is called assimilation. Our experiences change us the way we are. So something is relevant at some point, might not be relevant at other point in life. That's one aspect. A lot of time you'll come across couples who would say, we just grew apart. It's nobody's fault, but we just grew apart because their priorities have changed. Yeah. Then when we like or dislike someone, it's more than the physical aspect. You might come across people who are together and you will see them and you say, they don't really appear as they are close. They don't appear as being linked. Yeah. But psychologically, they might well be. A lot of relationships are not based on love. They are based on needs. If you look at it, like if someone has psychological needs and those needs are met by the other person, because infatuation side of a relationship doesn't last long. It fizzles out pretty quickly. And then very much like meat on the bone, you are actually have to live with somebody,
This happens with
the real person.
every relationship.
Exactly.
It is very and you're very enthusiastic initially, and then it changes
Exactly.
slowly and
Exactly.
steadily. So my next question, which is ties up with this one, so rejection then leads to depression or low mood, or is depression different from or rejection is different from depression?
No, depression is a clinical condition which needs to satisfy the criteria. But on the other hand, a lot of times it's a reactive depression. It's actually secondary to a life event. Now, sometimes people don't see themselves walking in the dark because you are in a relationship. You don't expect your spouse to turn around and say, I don't love you anymore and I want to be out of this relationship, and you couldn't see it coming. But on the other hand, every relationship is based on some basic principles. If those principles are not there, like simple example is job. You accept an employment, you sign a contract with an employer. The employer expects you to do certain things. If you don't do those certain things, you are in breach of your contract with the employer. And if the employer turns around and sack you, you shouldn't be angry about it. Relationships are social contracts. They are based on certain things. And if those things are not being satisfied, you are not doing your job right in a relationship. Yeah. Now, the physical aspect of the relationship, which I said that infatuation fizzles out, but it remains to be there to some extent. Because by the end of the day, a relationship, a spousal relationship or an intimate relationship got to have some level of intimacy to satisfy the contractual criteria to be together. And if it is not there, the relationship is very much like an employee and an employer, where employee is not working this job. So breach of contract in some ways. And after a while, the relationship will start cracking down. I give you an example, very interesting, before we go to. Many years ago, I used to work in accident emergency department. Now, accident emergency departments are generally, when you are on a night shift, you have a whole range of nurses working with you. Yeah. And one of the nurses actually used to tell her stories. At the time when I was as a junior doctor in accident emergency department, that specific nurse, I clearly remembers, she was at the verge of ending her relationship, and she eventually ended. It was the love of their teenage years. They've been together for many years. And when I asked her, you have been together for that many years, what brought the relationship to an end? You know what she said to me? That nurse actually said to me is, there is nothing left in this relationship. I'm turned into his mother. I'm just looking after him. We've been together for that long. There's no intimacy left in it.
All right. So when these relationship break down and there's rejection, so how to cope with this? How especially the young people, some of them do
Yes.
react very badly, and
Yes.
some do take their life.
Exactly. Now, when a child develops its trust from the very start of life, that is where the stability comes in, whether to trust this world or not to trust this world. Now, if a child is grown in a stable environment, loving parents, security, safety around the child, the likelihood is that that young man grown in a stable environment is likely to be affected by rejection, but not destroyed by rejection. But sometimes if rejection becomes a part of an individual at a very early life, then the ability to cope with rejection is very weak and makes life very difficult for a young man to cope with it. And how do they cope with it? Sometimes they self-harm, take overdoses, or in some unfortunate cases, and in doing something very serious with their lives. How to cope with that? Now, again, going back to my first video, which I had with you guys, was talking. Don't suffer in isolation. You got to have a confiding relationship, some friend, some non-sexual relationship, a good friend who can actually deal with your emotions. These are again going back to not to let yourself face psychorupsy. You need to have some psycho resources in your system to deal with this. And how to improve your psycho resources? Invest in it. Biological relationships. Why most people after relationship breakdown go and live with their parents or with their mothers? The first thing they think of is going back home. Even I have a house to live in, but I would like to stay some months with my parents. It's all about the psychological strengths. You got to learn to replace the loss with the strength. You have lost someone. You need someone to trust, need someone who must not disappoint you at that time. Even if you are irrational,
Come out.
even if you are talking something which doesn't make sense to anybody, yeah, the person should have ability to provide you that cozy, comfortable corner to feel safe and secure.
So what I correct me if I'm wrong, that what you said, that if this happens, you need someone to talk, and the best people to talk
Yes.
is your parents or somebody you know the best,
Biological relationships always takes precedent over social
which
relationships.
can be your siblings.
Exactly. Invest in it. Never break your biological relationships.
And investment
Unless there is an absolute reason, because there are people who actually suffer quite devastating experiences from people they love and trust. So, but mostly we see that biological relationships are the ones which have more stronger ties than the social relationship. But a very good friend, a trusting friend, is good enough to provide you that emotional support at the time of crisis. So that is the first thing, because acute crisis will take the rationality out of your mind. So you got to have someone who can comfort you at that time, even if you are irrational. The second stage is when you start getting yourself back to normal self, then you need to work around thinking rationally. Lot of times when we fall in love with someone more impulsively, if we take a step back and think over the practical aspects of that impulsive crush, we would realize that this might not be the right decision we
but
were
love is
taking.
blind.
Exactly.
Can I ask a question then?
Mm.
So a lot of people I know, you'd say that obviously going to a friend and a biological parent or sibling is a great way to cope with it. But a lot of people that I know have found exercise to be a good coping mechanism for these things because it will increase energy levels and make them happy. So what do you think about that?
Distraction techniques, it could be any.
Yeah.
Do something which you have your interest. If you like to exercise, use exercise as a distraction technique. If you are a painter, if you like painting, paint. If you write, write. That's another way of releasing your stress.
So you would say not to necessarily rationally talk to the person and explain the problems that went on and just comfort them kind of thing and distract yourself in the beginning stages.
What happens is, at certain, you got to have the mindset to accept rationality. And if you cross that threshold, you are not going to accept rationality.
Okay.
Yeah. So for the acute stage, for the firefighting situation, the last thing you want is your closest start giving you the advice what you should and should not do. The long list of do and don'ts don't work at that time, rather complicate the situation.
Yeah.
Just going back to again me as a doctor, depression has diurnal variation. It has a change in hormones and stuff like that. Does that happen in this scenario as well? You know, where there is
It
a
can. It can. And if it happens, like in depression, sleep and appetite is affected. People wake up with rotten mood and the mood gets better as the day gets along. That's a diurnal mood variation. Lethargy, lack of energy, motivation to do things. Some people develop physical symptoms, sickness, tiredness, lack of energy.
is it
And if
in
it
both?
continues for a couple of weeks, obviously it is 2 to 3 weeks. It is clinical depression, require antidepressants, but life events don't always require antidepressant.
Oh, that is a very good, I think, message that if you got this, any life event, especially we are talking
Yes.
about rejection, you don't rush for the medication, rather
Yes.
talking to someone and, as Diane said, distraction techniques, which is, you second that, yes, distraction techniques is the right one. So if it carries on for more than 3 weeks and they have got some features of depression, as you suggested, by less eating and sleep and appetite and diurnal variation, then it's turning into depression, and then you need medical advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Means what happens is we need to realize that our minds are psychological systems are designed to cope with adversities. I mean, people have coped with adversities when there was no concept of psychiatry ever existed in this world. Yeah. So our mind and psychological systems automatically recovers from life events. But if it start interfering your sleep and appetite to the extent that you just stopped eating, you just stop sleeping, and it has become impossible, then you need to strike a balance between how far you need to let yourself suffer or take medication. But the first strategy must be talking to someone. A lot of times professional help is required. Means like counseling service is very good. Increase access to psychological therapies, IAPT, which is a good service for life event based scenarios, job losses, relationship breakdown, these things provide good service. But if it continues and it has actually become quite serious, then of course you need more of a medical side help, the medication. But a lot of times just talking to someone, counseling services, I will not go for detailed psychological therapies here, because simple things needs simple solutions. relationship breakdowns, job losses, these things are simple life events. They need simple solutions. Just a counselor might be more beneficial than going to a highly experienced psychologist and start getting yourself digging the past, because digging past is not always beneficial.
All right. Any question, Diane?
No questions for me right now.
Yeah, I mean, my message is very simple. Invest in relationships before anything happens. You need your loved ones to hold your hand and give you a hug when
I just
you
want
are
to
in trouble.
ask you one question. There are different people with different personalities. So some people who have got these problems like relationship breakdowns, or they have got how to cope with this breakups or rejection. Some will go take your advice, will go to these their loved ones or a relationship, but there will be someone who will not go, who will remain isolated because they have got their own personality like this. So how will you help? How can we help them? Is there people around who should recognize? How will they recognize what has happened?
The first thing is that,
Family and friends, I mean.
yes, means like you can't have a totally isolated life. And if you're a totally isolated person, then you can only cope for a very brief period. I'm even talking about from the autism side of things, where I have come across individuals with a very intelligent, very brainy people, super intelligent in many things, but as a person, they can't really cope with socialization, but still they socialize because
My question was, is there
yeah,
anything which the family can pick on?
yes, if they are linked, and is there any change in their behavior, got to be picked up. They can observe whether the person is doing the same, means like eating or sleeping, or is there a change in the mood, behavior? They have become more irritable, more angrier than usual. Are they pursuing their interest or not pursuing their interest? These are the things other people can see and pick upon. But if you are, let's say, if you're totally socially isolated and you have suffered such an event, how to manage yourself? For that reason, I think, give yourself time. Don't slip into using any substance or drown yourself in the bottle, or start taking non-prescribed drugs to get over with the crisis, because it is very much like not choosing not to walk on a sprained ankle. If you sprain your ankle and you walk on a sprained ankle, the chances are you'll get better quicker. If you pick crutches, it will linger on.
Okay, the
So,
message is clear today. That message has been loud and clear. Please talk to your loved one. Invest in your relationship. Your siblings, your parents. You must have somebody to talk. If you can't talk, then there are services available where you can go and talk to them, and don't suffer in silence. I think we are running out of time, and we will get back again with another topic. Please, if there is any question, post the question in the comment sections. And we again very, very thankful for Diane Mirza, and especially Dr. Sammad Hashmi, the consultant psychiatrist, to joining and helping our friends and families and colleagues around.
I think one more thing as well is, if you think that you've had symptoms of depression, as we were talking about diurnal mood variation, then check out the last video called Understanding and Conquering Depression, just to make sure that you
Right.
can check.
Thank you.
thank you very much for
Thank you.
inviting me.